one and represents one of the biggest dilemmas facing us today: Alzheimer's disease and dementia. With no cure in sight and hundreds more being diagnosed weekly, Alzheimer's is more feared than cancer or heart disease. Join us as David Levy breaks it down and educates, informs, and explains useful caregiver strategies and techniques that 25 years of non-clinical family caregiving have taught him. You can listen or call in and be part of the show. 888-565-1470 to ask your questions. And now, here's David Levy.
All right. Good evening, Boca, America, and the world. This is the Caregiver Reality Show. I'm your host, David Levy, gerontologist. My co-host, Paul, and we have a very special guest this evening, Barry, who we'll get to in just a minute. He's got not a unique story, but certainly it has all of the drama in caregiving that more than anyone really needs. And he'll be explaining his situation. You know, we're bringing you a little science, a little human interest, a little caregiver education, and we're all about the caregiver. And so those of you that are listening, you're either watching us on caregiverreality.com live show, you're listening to us on iHeart.com, Florida, WNN, or WWNN 1470 right here in Boca Raton. And for those of you that want to call in, it's 888-565-1470. And so without any further ado, let me first say, Paul, how was your week? I know it's been a tough one.
Oh, David, this is one of those 8-day weeks that go along with caregiving.
Yep, I know the name of the game, and it's been a tough one at home too. And I know you've had some difficulties. We don't need to get into the gory details, but when we talk about spousal caregiving, we know we're both caregiving for our wives. So is our guest. And so everybody has an interesting story to tell, and everybody's is a little different.
And the holidays just make it even more fun.
Oh, yes. And families coming down. And so I'm looking forward to seeing them, but it's always a Chinese fire drill. All right.
That's the truth.
All right. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Barry. Barry, thank you for coming on the show. I met Barry a few weeks ago in one of my caregiver groups. He has kind of a different story to tell, and I'm going to let him tell it. Barry, why don't you back up a little bit and tell us, how'd you get to where you are?
Well, I got here rather suddenly. My wife has Parkinson's, which was diagnosed about 10 years ago, but she's always been okay physically. She had the tremor and she's had some medication, but most people wouldn't even notice that she had Parkinson's. Then about 2.5 years ago, she was diagnosed with dementia, which is an offshoot of Parkinson's. And we were devastated, but really didn't know what we were going to expect. And then
how long have you been married, Barry?
50 years, and let me just tell you that that goes in with this awful story. We celebrated our 50th on August 31st, just 100 days ago. Mm-hmm. And my wife was starting to have real signs of dementia. And we had that party, and I had 5 or 6 couples. She recognized everybody. She talked to everyone. But immediately after that, it was like she was waiting for that. She went completely downhill. And it's been an awful, awful... these guys were talking about last week. To me, every day is Groundhog Day. It's the same, and it's been that way now for 90 days straight. Every day is the same, and it's just awful.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. And when you say downhill without, dragging up a lot of storm and drang or more emotion, what do you mean? She made it through the party, which was the end of August. And since that time, her dementia has just accelerated?
Yes, she was doing pretty well, forgetting things, but nothing too extensive. But right after the party, one night, she, I would think it was a breaking point of some sort, where she, 2 o'clock in the morning, she woke me, and she was dressed. And I said, what are you doing? And she said that she had to go to school. Of course, there is no school. And I said, please go back into bed. And she went back into bed. And then 3 hours later, she woke me up again. And the lights were on. The dog was running around. And she was at what I call a total break, in that she didn't know where she was and who I was. And it was just awful. And at that time, I took her to the doctor. And that's when he decided to put her in the hospital for a while to diagnose it.
Okay, and so it turned out to be Parkinsonian dementia and various other psychotic episodes that went on.
Right, she has Lewy body dementia. Yeah.
Okay, and so it's been downhill since the hospital and since that break.
Yeah, since that break, she's just at this point she doesn't know me. She thinks I'm her father, which I'm told, is that, David? Is that common?
Yes. Matter of fact, any male figure can become a father when you become demented. And we hear a lot of times folks with dementia asking for mommy and daddy and identifying their spouses or other relatives as that person.
Is that because they can reach back for their memory from 50 years ago, but
Well,
not from 50 minutes?
It's not necessarily that they can reach back. Each kind of dementia works its own special way, but mommy and daddy, or those kind of words, we've always had them embedded, and they're almost like idioms. So when she doesn't know who you are, and she can't recall that you're her husband, she'll go ahead and call you daddy.
Right.
All right.
That's what's happened. Yeah, and she's forgotten just about everything. A couple of things that you might be interested in. Please feel free to cut me off if it's too much.
But I do want to ask one
go ahead,
question.
sure.
I know your daughter came into town today, and when she saw your wife, did your wife recognize her?
She did briefly. It's hard to tell the difference because with her dementia, she says a lot of when she talks. She doesn't talk that much, but she says a lot of things you'd expect. Hello, goodbye, thank you. Oh, that's nice. How are you? So when she says how are you, I'm not sure if she knows who she is or not.
Well, they tend to go to idioms. It's not unusual, and it's no different when the kids call on the phone and they say, "Mom, how are you?" and "Fine." You know, and when you feed a question, you'll get those 2 or 3 word answers, and so even if she pushed them out to respond to your daughter, it wasn't that she was more than likely thinking about it or that it was a coherent thought process. It was simply something that flew in.
Right, and as I think back now, she didn't mention her by name. She usually would call her by name, but she didn't.
Okay, and so move on a little bit in the story. So you're 90 or 100 days into that break after the party. Well, the incident after the party and the break that put you in the hospital.
Right. She was in the hospital for them to see what could be the problem, and they thought it could be something to do with a lady's problem. I think is it called a UTI?
Well, many times, no, a UTI, a urinary tract infection,
right.
Which many people, especially women, if they're incontinent and they're wearing a diaper, it keeps that bacteria very close, and once you get it, then they started to treat you with medication, and usually they use the fast-acting medication like Levaquin or Cipro. And you really can't take it for more than 5 or 6 days. And what happens is you continue to build kind of a super infection because it never really gets knocked out. And what happens is if you run a temperature, which usually happens with a UTI, you lose a liter of fluid for every percentage of temperature that you have above normal.
Oh.
And that directly affects the brain because it starts to dry it out. And when the brain doesn't have the fluid level that it should, cognitive process, delusions, etc. A lot of things can occur, and so the UTI is almost one of the things in this day and age that we jump to eliminate because it's so common.
Right, and what the doctor had said was that if it was a UTI, that could be the cause for her having that initial breakdown. As it was not a UTI.
Right.
They didn't know what it was. The second day in the hospital, they decided to put in a Foley catheter.
Right.
And then she came home, and they said the catheter would be permanent. And it was quite disturbing to her. And she pulled it out,
Right.
put it back, pulled it out, put it back. After the third time, the doctor said, don't put it back and see what happens. And when they did that, she had no effect. So she didn't have a UTI, and obviously she didn't have anything because she was able to then
Right.
go normally. Yeah. And then at that point we decided, I'm very fortunate, and I would say it's 100% luck. We retired 21 years ago to Florida, and when we were here and did all the things you do when you move from a state, we had to get the homestead and the driver's license and a bunch of things. And the attorney said to me, "Do you have long-term health care?" And I said, "No, I don't even know what that is." And he said, "You need to have it." And I was about 50 at the time, and my wife. And he said it was $1,500 a year per person, which we could afford, and which I bought. And he said every year you'll have the opportunity to increase it based on the cost of living. So we've had that for 20 years. And so now, when she became sick, the doctor said, "Do you have a long-term health policy?" And I said, I think I do. And it took me a while to find it.
Right.
And I called the company and I said,
What's my benefit?
"What's my benefits? I've been paying you for 20 years. What do I get?" And I was very pleased to hear that my benefit was $15,000 a month, which sounds like a lot of money.
Yes, it does.
Until
you pay for 24-hour care.
Right. The doctor said I needed 24-hour care, and 24/7 cost $15,000
Right.
exactly, just by coincidence,
Right.
a health coincidence.
All right. Until after the first of the year, when everybody adjusts up for some reason.
Well, yes, I'll get another $20 or something because the cost of living will
Right.
go
Well,
up.
believe me, the aides, and I'm sure they're excellent, will find a way to separate you from that 20.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, when you were at that attorney, one of the things that you did besides getting his good advice about long-term care is you had durable powers of attorney and advanced directives drawn up for you and your wife. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes, we had living wills, we had health surrogates, so everything that the attorney, thank God, was excellent. And again, when you're young, you don't
Right.
do these things. They're just
It's
like
for
now,
somebody else.
Yeah, just like now in the country, people like my daughter, who's in her 40s, they don't think about health. They think they're invincible, and
Right.
so that's why hopefully everyone will have health care at some point.
Well, it's not only a question of health care, but making the distinction between getting health care and having the proper documentation. Your daughter is no different than anyone else above the age of majority wherever she happens to live. And if you do not have those advanced directives and durable powers of attorney, it's very, very difficult to get the healthcare system to talk to you and listen to you, because you cannot, if you're not able to guide your own ship, so to speak, and the person that's named, if you don't have it, and you wind up in a place where you're not known or your doctor isn't on staff, where at least you can get some concession, out of communication, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
You get hit by a bus in Podunk, and you have to go deal with a hospitalist who basically works for the hospital and takes care of most inpatients, and you don't have those documents, the HIPAA laws will stop them from conversing with you, plan a treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So you did a couple of very smart things.
Yeah.
One, you bought long-term care
Yeah.
at a time when it was affordable.
Sure, and it was really luck and very, very well luck.
Well,
and the groups,
serendipitous is fine.
for sure. And the groups that I've attended that you've been the moderator, I am. I was very surprised that most people do not have what I have. I'm very fortunate that I have it, although we all have the same illness, the person who's sick, and
Well,
I don't know what
those
they can
people,
do.
Right. Most of those people, when they were 50, didn't think about it. You happen to have had a good guide in your attorney, And then what happens is they reach a point, both age-wise and health-wise, that either they can't be underwritten, or the premium is so outrageous that even if they take it for a while, they can't keep it up.
Right. David, I wanted to ask you, when in some of the groups where I saw that the people were,
Struggling.
they might have some money, but they were struggling and they didn't have the help that I have, and they doing it themselves.
Yes.
Is that what they do?
That's exactly, if you don't
Oh, my
have,
God.
if you don't have the money to bring in outside help, then you've got to do it yourself. There's really nothing in the healthcare system, unless you happen to have been in the hospital. They discharge you to home, and you may get some home care for a little while, depending upon what you went in the hospital for. But most people are out there doing it on their own because they can't afford it, and there really isn't any other choice, because in this day and age, caregiving is going home. We don't have the facilities, and so to provide 24-hour care on your part is really wonderful. But yet, in spite of having the care, when you came into the group and my conversations with you, you're a very intelligent man, but it didn't mitigate any of your emotional concern as a caregiver, and how did you want to handle yourself, and what should you do. You felt somewhat, and I don't want to editorialize for you, but you felt somewhat trapped against the disease, and how to handle yourself, and that's very, very common. So that in spite of having the money, you didn't have any less of the caregiver angst or the difficulties that caregivers go through. It's just you had somebody to assist you with the physical, practical stuff.
Right. And well, once we got 24-hour help, and I realized how lucky I was. The luck goes out of your mind after the first 24 hours.
Right.
I've now had 24/7 help for 90 days, and I'm just about out of my mind because every day's Groundhog Day. I'm home all the time.
When you say Groundhog Day, every day you climb out and there's the same shadow?
Yep, the same shadow, the same day. I've gotten help from people like yourself, saying that I need to get out and do some things, and I've tried, but it's really difficult to go from we to me. Mm-hmm. And that's the toughest part.
We had somebody on last week and a few weeks back who was a caregiver like yourself, who ultimately had to put his wife in a dementia facility. And he, too, felt very hollow. And he met somebody, and they started to have, it was pizza and conversation, go to the movies, and whatever else it's become. They're big boys and girls. And it took him a while to get over that guilt, but when we really go back and look at it, and you recognize that somebody with dementia is no longer able to communicate, is no longer able to have the dialogue or the care and concern with you that you have for them, it does leave you with a lot of loss. And there's nothing wrong with finding somebody that you can go out and have a pizza with, or whatever it may be. It's called an emotional divorce, and we recognize it, especially with dementia, that even though your loved one may be alive, they are not the person that, and this individual and the person that was on last week, her name was Lynn, both of them helped take care of his wife. All right, so I mean, it's not like this is some clandestine affair. Even though the wife doesn't know who she is at the facility as often as he is, and she takes very good care of her. And that is more likely the case in these things than not. But, that's something that every individual has to get to a certain point in where they are. And as you said, when we becomes me, or we becomes I, it's very difficult, and I respect the fact that you're willing to at least say that, and I know how difficult those kinds of things can be. In the meantime, let's just continue on. I'm sorry,
if
Paul,
I
you have
may,
a question?
Barry, you say you have 24/7-hour caregiver. You're in the house at the same time. What is it that you're doing that the caregiver is not?
I'm not participating in the caregiving. I'm just doing nothing in the house. I'm watching TV. I'm on the computer. That's about all I'm doing.
Right.
And the caregivers, they happen to be wonderful, but they're not what you'd call skilled labor. They have a Florida license of
Home health aide.
home health aide, and even though it costs $15,000 a month, I think they get $10 or $11 an hour, and they have to put up with an awful lot of terrible things for that, and they do a good job.
It's a very difficult job to do, and especially when you're dealing with dementia, because for the most part, they're not really trained in how to deal with the emotional side of dementia, and they've been trained to deal mostly with the clinical side of the patient, whether that's wound care, toileting, whatever it may happen to be. But being around somebody in an 8-hour shift or 2 12s, whatever it is that you have going for you, is just as much wear and tear on them, even though it's not their spouse or loved one. After a while, it affects them the same way.
I would think so, because when I go in to see my wife to ask her a question or try to ask her a question, she can't answer the question, or it's gibberish. So I can't imagine what the people are doing that are there. And they're also sitting for 12 hours a day, except when they're toileting or
Right.
feeding or whatever they might be doing. And I commend them for the job. It's a job that nobody wants.
No. And you're 100% correct. And
Yep.
after 25 years and seeing an awful lot of it, I agree with you. It's
Yeah.
real tough. So let's continue on with your story, to
Well-
the extent that you want to.
Well, once that she came home from the hospital and we had 24/7, the doctor suggested that it was time to call hospice. And the reason he said that initially was because he was going out of town for a long time, and he's been our doctor for a long time. So I called hospice, and they reacted within, it seemed like minutes. And since that time, 90 days ago, they are there every single day, all the time. They send people every day, someone else, nurses, aides. They immediately, I didn't have to pay for it. I don't know where it came from. I think it
Medicare
came
pays
from
for it.
Medicare. They sent, we got a wheelchair, we got a potty, we got a bed, we got everything it possibly could want, and diapers and medication. And they deliver medication in the middle of the night if you need it, or in the morning, or whatever. And sometimes I think they were even overdoing it.
Well, hospice is, there are a number of hospice organizations within Palm Beach County, and each one of them in their own way, without competing with one another, does a wonderful job. I have nothing but the highest regard for hospice, and boy, when you need them, they are like the Mounties coming over the hill, to save you from whatever. And my hat is off to anybody who is a hospice worker, and I know plenty, because it is real selfless sacrifice. I don't care if you're earning a salary or not, to be able to deal with people essentially moving towards end of life. Really takes a unique human being.
Yes, in fact, you hit it right on the nail right on the head. When the first couple of people came in from hospice, I said to them, "How could you have this job?" And they all said, I was pretty shook by it. They said, "Well, I worked at the XYZ hospital for 7 years, and I saw people literally tortured at end of life because." One of the people I remember saying, "We're not allowed to give our opinion, as a nurse or assisting nurse." And so if someone had cancer, one part of the family wants to keep the person alive, the other part of the family wants not to keep them alive. They disregard the living wills and whatever, and they would put Band-Aids on someone who was definitely going to die. And so they couldn't take that. So now they move to hospice.
They deal with an
and what's the word?
that's
What's the word,
open.
David? I haven't. Is it palliative or palliative?
Palliative care.
Palliative care. So they move to palliative care, which is to make the person comfortable and do the best job that they can.
Right. And so that's what they're doing for you now.
That's what they're doing now. We've run into a couple of bumps,
Okay.
which are quite bothersome to me at this point. As you mentioned, over 20 years ago, we have the living will, the health surrogate. And by the way, it's been revised 4 times. The latest revision was only 120 days ago, before she had the full.
Well,
100.
that's good because the durable powers of attorney in Florida changed
Right.
in October of 2012.
Right.
And so anybody out there that has one that's earlier than October or March of 2012 and wasn't prepared by a good estates or elder care attorney, you really need to have it updated because Florida has now what's called 16 superpowers that have to be individually initialed and identified in order to be able, because there was too much abuse going on under the old durable power of attorney, and people would automatically think that that entitled them to the bank account and the safety deposit box and to take whatever they needed to
Yeah.
and deal with the situation, which is not the case. And so
Right.
now-
Yeah.
now-
No, ours was updated as of September 1st of this year, so it's just
Right,
a month
it's-
before my wife crashed. So just I'm glad that we have it.
Right.
But the problems I've been running into now with hospice is they will not accept my wife's living will. And just be brief, I'll tell you the reason. The living will is, I would think your listeners or viewers who have living wills, it says basically the same thing mine does. They're all the same language. The attorney draws up the language.
Exactly.
And it basically says that if you have a terminal condition, here's what your wishes are. In my wife's case, and in my case too, it says if I become mentally or physically incapacitated, I don't want to live. I want to be put to sleep, or whatever the wording is.
Well,
And-
normally what it used to say was if I'm in a permanent vegetative state, and that was the old Terry Schiavo language.
Right.
Since then, it's gotten, if I'm in a terminal condition, if there is no hope for a recovery, then I direct my healthcare providers and anybody else to not do anything invasive, do not do anything. Many times it'll say, don't give me water, don't put me on supplemental anything, and so that they really dictate what end of life means to them.
Right, and we have all of that, and almost in that language too. And my wife and I have discussed it a number of times. I would think that your listeners and viewers have also. As close as maybe 6 months ago, one of my daughters got remarried, and her new father-in-law took ill that night, went to the hospital, and had something terrible happen, and he had to have I think a tracheotomy.
Okay.
And the doctor said that he would be in a wheelchair, never be able to speak again, and by the way, it would be like $10,000 a month. They didn't have insurance for it, and so the family had to make a decision. Took them a few days, but they decided to pull the plug because he would not have a life, and it would drain them of all their money. And so, back to my wife, hospice is not honoring the living will. I don't know why, but I intend to be meeting with them in the first week in January to find out why. David, if I could just say this, I've been doing so much research on my own.
Right.
I found out that recently in the Netherlands, they do euthanasia. They put people to sleep, but you have to go through an awful lot. You just can't walk in and be put
And
to sleep.
say,
Right.
take my wife.
Right. And
Please.
here's what the problem is. In the Netherlands, you need to go before a judge and say that you wish to pass.
Your loved one pass.
Right. Oh, no, the loved one has to express it. And then 30 days later, the person who wants to be put to sleep has to come back. They give them 30 days to double think about it and then say that, and then they pass.
Right.
But amazingly, in the last few weeks, the Netherlands have updated that law to include Alzheimer's and dementia, which is a huge step. It doesn't help us in the United States, I don't think.
No.
But what they're saying, let me just be quickly about it. What they say now is if you have dementia and Alzheimer's, it's equal to having a painful ending. Like if you had cancer and you had a lot of pain and they give you compazine or morphine or whatever.
All right, Barry, I want you to hold that thought,
Okay.
please,
All
because
right.
we got to take a station break.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go to our station break. You're listening to Barry and Paul and myself, and we're discussing Barry's situation with his wife that has Parkinson's and dementia and advanced directives. And if you've got something you'd like to say, 888-565-1470, and we'll see you right after the break.
1470 WWNN Pompano Beach, WKIS HD3 Boca Raton, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
We're back, and we're talking with Barry, who has a very difficult situation, and I'm going to I'm going to ask him if he will he was just talking about the Netherlands and how folks that were not cognitively impaired could go before a judge and say, I have an insufferable illness.
Their surrogate can go because they're not able to speak.
Okay, and then come back 30 days later after everybody's thought about it and see whether or not. And right now in states like Oregon, the person needs to be evaluated by 2 psychiatrists, and it's very, very difficult to get a psychiatrist to say, yeah, you should take your own life, or we should assist you in doing it. But I want to pick up where you were, because you said in January you're going before the hospice board to try and understand, you finish it, why they won't honor your directives, or your wife's
yes,
directive.
let me finish my thought on the Netherlands. So the Netherlands are saying now, they never said this before for 20 years or however long euthanasia has been there, they're saying that dementia and Alzheimer's are now equal in their mind and in the mind of the law to painful diseases. So that my wife, and I'm certainly not going to go to the Netherlands or anything, but the point is, a person who has dementia or an Alzheimer's like my wife cannot express anything. So she couldn't go there and say, I'm in pain, and she's in pain. She's trapped in her body. She's trapped in her head. She can't express herself. Well, now the health surrogate, which in this case is me, could go before the court in the Netherlands and say, this person has dementia, Alzheimer's. Here's what the living will says. She can't talk for herself. She wants to go, and we would like you to assist her. And then we'd have to come back 30 days. Again, I think it's a good idea. They make you think about it twice, and then they do it. Then they will allow it, and they do it in a dignified way. They also say, for the people who are against it, that this is not assisted suicide. It is giving peace to someone who is no longer there. It's like the living dead. My wife is no longer who she was. She's not a person at all. She can't speak, she can't think, she can't walk, she can't do anything. And she can't tell us what's in her head. Sometimes I say to her, what are you thinking about? I get no answer from her, but I don't know.
You can't expect that from somebody with dementia.
Right, you can't know what that is. So
right. Let me just make a point. In the living wills that we use, or advance directives, here in Florida, and I'm not speaking as a lawyer, although long ago I went to law school, but nowhere in there it says, if we have a terminal illness, if I have a degenerative brain disease, then I do not want any heroic interventions. Don't put me on IVs, don't give me supplemental oxygen, whatever the case may be. And I've even said, I don't want to be hydrated, don't give me food, whether it's by mouth or intravenously, what have you. And they will honor that. However, with hospice and the way the laws are written in this state, what they are saying is, we will keep you, when you describe palliative or end-of-life care, we will keep the patient as clean, pain-free, and dignified as it is possible to do. But we cannot intervene and say, all right, I'm going to give her a big dose of morphine so that it will be over. Our laws have not come that far. The Netherlands is a little more enlightened than we may be. But nowhere, and I think when you go see hospice and you speak to the board, they're going to make that distinction, that we will do everything and not intervene, but nature has to take its course. And if she's in pain, we'll give her morphine. If there's other issues, we'll do whatever it takes palliatively to make her as comfortable as possible until nature and God decide what it is, the time and the ending.
Okay, but David, my question to you is the difference that they use in the Netherlands and the difference that I'm thinking about is my wife does not have pain as pain is described as you did.
Right.
If you have cancer or if you have something where your bones are falling apart or you're in lots of pain, I could understand that morphine. My wife has pain that we can't know about because it's in her head and it's in her body. And that's the part that I want hospice to understand. So I want her to get the palliative care, but also I want her to her directions to be followed, which again are no food and no eating and
right. And they're, I would assume they're honoring that at this point.
No, they're not at this point, but we're
Well, all right, then you can certainly say I don't want her to eat, but normally what happens in real end of life. And I'm not saying that you're not there. I don't know the situation, nor am I a clinician. But normally as someone gets to the end stage of their lives, they stop eating. They stop drinking. Their body shuts down, and the process then ultimately comes to an end. So that before that happens, at least in this state, in 2013 going on to 2014, they cannot intervene any further to promote her end of life. They can simply honor her wishes to essentially do nothing. And if you were to make the argument with them that, and you know the way it's written, it says, I don't want to be fed or hydrated. And that normally comes when your body is shutting down and you're not eating and drinking, that they're not to intervene. But if the body is not at that particular point, then it would be uncomfortable for them to go ahead and take food and hydration away if she has not reached the point where that was where she was in the normal course of events.
Barry, are they not giving her any pain medication?
No, she's not, because they don't know if she's in pain.
Right.
She doesn't have any physical pain that we know of. I mean, she could have pain in her head, but we don't know that. Right. And David, I would ask you that that's another part that's very disturbing. You know, what you said is what they said to me. They said, well, you can expect that the next thing that will happen to her will be she won't be able to swallow and she'll choke on herself. Well, why should she? Why? That's not what her wish was. No. In other words, you're saying she has to show signs of terrible...
Right. You know, she has to be within that spectrum of end of life where her body starts to shut down. And what happens, especially with things like swallowing, it's a use it or lose it proposition, especially with dementia. So what normally would happen is that, A, she wouldn't be able to swallow, or if she did, she might not be able to swallow effectively, and she would aspirate or get it in her lungs and get pneumonia or some other pulmonary condition and pass away from that. If she were to get another UTI, you could say, I don't want her going to the hospital, and I don't want antibiotics being administered, and whether or not that would hasten things, because if she ran a temperature and other things happened to her body as a result of that, that would put you where the advanced directives are speaking to. But so far we're not enlightened enough. But I will tell you, Barry, that what you are going through, millions of Americans are going through this and dealing with the conflict of a loved one who can no longer communicate, who can no longer think, who essentially the caregiver, whether it's the spouse or another loved one or paid help, are keeping them alive because our laws do not permit us to we can only pull the plug if there's a plug to pull. And she's not on a respirator like your daughter's father-in-law, and she's not on intravenous, and even though she has, because you and I have discussed it, has a pacemaker, it's not capable of being turned off. And so even if you were to make that argument, I doubt substantially that you would let them take her to the hospital, open her up, and take it out. And I don't think that the medical ethics committee would approve of it either. Right. So you are
that's not an issue.
Right. You are in the classic catch-22. You're watching your wife deteriorate in front of you. I will tell you that more than likely that she is not in pain in her brain. There was a neuroscientist who had a stroke a few years back and recovered from it enough to write a book and tell people about it. And one of the things she said, as her brain was being really traumatized by the stroke, that our bodies create certain hormones and reactions, including endorphins. And she said she was on such a high while she was having that stroke that she wasn't sure she wanted to come back from it. And I'm not saying that your wife has that, but as our brain degenerates, whether it's because of Lewy body dementia or Alzheimer's or temporal frontal lobe or whatever it may be, we're not sure because we can't ask, how do you feel? Now, if she were in true pain, hospice and you would recognize it because she'd be reacting the way anybody else would. She'd be wincing, she'd be crying, she would express herself in some ways. And I know from the amount of time I spend in dementia facilities that people that have hurt themselves, that are in pain, you can detect that in somebody that has dementia. So I think, not that it will give you any comfort, but I don't think that your wife is in the kind of pain that we would think about, although she is trapped in a body with a brain that doesn't function, and we don't know at what level that she's at. But ostensibly she can't speak, but she can hear, she can touch. You know, she has a sensation if you touch her, etc. So that some of the bodily senses are there, but it's impossible in the situation you're in to ask somebody to go ahead and do something affirmatively to put her out of her misery. And that is something in a society where we are seeing more and more dementia and more people suffering with it at home with caregivers that can't cope. We're going to have to come up with a better solution. I'm not saying that it's the Kevorkian method, because Kevorkian dealt with people that had like Lou Gehrig's disease, and they could at least communicate and say, I don't want to be here. And so in that regard,
right.
He
That's
would
the
say,
biggest difference.
Right. And then he would say, fine, here's something I've set up for you. All right, if you want to take your, and that's what assisted suicide is, as opposed to somebody affirmatively taking somebody's life.
Right. Well, the thing that troubles me even more than this awful thing that I'm going through, and that she's going through, and I feel awful for her, and for myself,
yourself,
but
right.
more so for her because I love her so much. The question becomes, and I've been doing research on this, reading things, is that hospice took her as a patient because they think that she has 6 months or less to live.
Correct.
But they
her
do not.
Her doctor felt that way.
Right.
That's why.
But when I talked to hospice, they said they really don't know. And things I've been reading say they really don't know. And my biggest fear is, what if she remains in this state for
an
months,
extended period
years?
of time?
I don't know how I could possibly survive if it turns out to be that long, because it's just not fair. But do you have anything you could say about that?
Well, I don't think it, unfortunately in questions like this, it's not an issue so much of fairness, because what's fair to affirmatively take somebody's life, but you're suffering. And one of the things that you may have to do is detach yourself from the day-to-day coming out of the gopher hole, seeing the same. And I know you've been married for 50 years. It's not easy, but emotionally, you're going to have to begin to separate yourself from all of this difficulty that you see every day, because if not, you're going to wind up with a heart attack. You're going to wind up with stress-related issues, whether it's a bad ulcer or whatever it may be. And if your wife could come back and speak to you, and you were to ask her, or if the situation were reversed, you would not expect her to be so caught up in your illness that she went down with your ship. Caregiving is about doing the best you can do, but it's not about getting sick and suffering at the level that you're doing it. Now, intellectually, I know you understand me. Emotionally, that's very hard to absorb, and it's difficult to understand. And that's what the concept of an emotional divorce is really about, is to begin to create a separation so that you can have some benefit of surviving this. Because Barry, if you die and your wife is left simply to be cared for, there is nothing to be gained with your suffering. You've suffered long enough.
Right.
You've watched the Parkinson's for 10 years. You've watched the progression of dementia. You've watched what's happened in the last 90 days. And nobody says that if you suffer more, that I would tell you right now, Barry, that if you're suffering and if you were to go and, self-immolate yourself or, whatever, that it would return your wife to a level of being that was pre-Parkinson's. I would say that's a decision that you have to make. But this level of suffering is not doing anything to improve her, and if she were here to tell you that, she would. I'm convinced of it.
Well, I appreciate that, and I want to say that I've talked to my children, and we are all in agreement that we know she's not going to be better. We know she's definitely going to die based on the disease.
Correct.
And so now the question
is really
when. And so I've been talking to my daughters, and you tell me what your feeling is about it. They have said to me that when I go before the board in January, if they deny it, they're suggesting, my daughters are, and one doctor is, that I put her in a nursing home, which I promised I never would do. And but I don't know. That would detach me somewhat.
Right. Well, understand something, that whether it's a nursing home, you certainly have enough money to put her in a good memory disorder facility. If that were to occur, you have to decide, the family has to decide if that's the best course of events. But right now, you have 24-hour care. And so if you want to get out, you have the equivalent of what, other than, because if right now you were to put her in a memory facility in the condition that she's in, I would say to you, one of the benefits of people that don't have dementia possibly at the level that your wife does in assisted living is their stimulation activities, etc. But it doesn't sound to me like she could participate in that. So that
exactly, we've ruled that out. She can't participate in anything.
So to clinically put her in a nursing home, I would say to you, and your daughter's off camera, and I'm not sure that she's there yet anyhow, and you have a level of care that will not go away anytime soon. And as a result of that, now you have to do some of the same things that you would do if your wife were in a facility, because you have the level of care, you have hospice, you have everything going for you in that respect. And I know, because we talked about it, that in a few days you were going to go out to California and see family or take a break, and that's the smartest thing that you can do. You're a plane ride back if anything were to happen.
I'm going to do that, but I'm terribly I'm not looking forward to it. I mean, I know that I'll be missing her and be worried about it. But tell me what several people have said, my daughters included, that this country is cruel in a lot of ways. If I put her in a nursing home, okay, I can't put her in assisted living because there's nothing to do there. Are they going to be interested in the money? Has money really become an issue? One of my daughters said if you put her in a nursing home, they're going to keep her alive as long as they can because they're going to get $15,000 a month. Is that true?
Well, a little bit less than that, but today in Florida, a good nursing home will cost you $12,000 a month, so you definitely have the dollars to pay for it. The issue becomes, can they keep her alive? Because Parkinson's with dementia is a terminal illness, and there's no U-turn on that road.
So wait a second, you're saying the issue is can they keep her alive as opposed to one of my daughters saying, if you put her in there, they're going to want to keep her alive as long as they can.
They're going to want to, but there's very little that anybody can do to intervene with degeneration of the brain, which is really what's going on.
Right.
It's one thing if she had an infection and they could administer antibiotics, which would be against your advanced directives or any other kind of affirmative intervention. So the likelihood that they could, quote, keep her alive as long as possible is probably not something with her level of dementia and brain degeneration that they could do.
David,
yes, Paul.
I'd like to ask Barry a question. You've been doing so much for your wife. You've been speaking to your children. What have you been doing for yourself? Have you been getting counseling? You've been going to support groups?
Yes, I go to support groups, and I do have a psychologist I go to every week. We've been talking about it. I'm trying to have those outlets. And all of my friends have been nice and kind, and we've gone out a few times. I don't enjoy it, but I've done it. I've gone to the movies a few times. I think that this trip to California, hopefully I'll learn something more about myself. And I wanted to ask you and David to put your medical hats on, if you will, even though you're not medical people, neither am I, is that if I can get myself moving and not face Groundhog Day every day, am I better off leaving her at home with the 24/7 help than putting her in a nursing home? That would only work if I get out of the house.
That's correct.
That's right.
Paul, do you want to make a comment about that, wearing your doctor hat?
When my dad passed in January, and his problem was really the opposite of your wife's problem. He had most of his mind, but he lost his body. And he was aware of what was going on, and he was able to make choices. But we decided he would have a higher quality of life by being under someone else's roof than under our roof. And what we did, as the medical directives have for you, no interventions, medical only, medications, and we were very observant as to what was being done. We were very proactive on that. I think you have to work through and process how you can let this go for you with the love that you have, with the full appreciation of this wonderful woman in the life that you had, and understand that she's on a pathway that you can't stop. And she would want you to try to find a way for yourself. Going to California is a good first step. Therapy is a good second step, and support groups, because you are not the only one in the world going through this. You need to talk to people who are in the same boat.
Okay.
And Barry, here's my comment regarding a facility. I think between your 24-hour care and hospice there for any clinical issue that might arise, I think you have essentially created a nursing home within your home. And you made some promises, and in this particular case, you have the wherewithal to keep it. If you said to her, I'm not going to put you in a nursing home, many times I have to deal with people that made that promise but don't have a choice. And your daughters and other people around you that care may not be ready to make, but I don't make that decision. But in my mind, what you have set up between hospice and full-time care you have that equivalent. And so I think that you can go out of the house, and I don't think you have to deal right now, if at all, with the conflict of, do I have to place her somewhere? Because you made wise decisions 20 years ago, and they're coming back right now to be a benefit in a very difficult situation. We only have another minute or two, and Barry, I really want to thank you very much. This is a difficult subject. You're a very bright, articulate man. You have brought an issue not only to the show but to the world that very few people would share, and that it was our opportunity to have you on, and I want to say thank you very much.
I want to thank you for giving me this hour of enormous help.
All right. Well,
thank you.
If we've been a help, thank you. And if we've helped others out there who may be dealing with the same kind of thing but don't have the wherewithal to keep a loved one at home, don't be afraid to explore a facility alternative if you have to. And whether you have to put somebody on Medicaid in order to get them in a nursing home or whatever the issue may be, do not go down with the ship. It makes no sense. And so, Boca, America, and the world, you've heard it here first. I don't think anybody has had this on the air before. Barry, thank you. Paul, thank you. Next week, we have Dr. Hilfiker, who will be calling in and discussing his very confusing issues regarding his cognitive impairment and what is or isn't Alzheimer's. So I want to thank you on behalf of everybody here, and we'll see you next week with the Caregiver Reality Show. And you can catch us tomorrow. It'll be posted. It'll be out on the internet and 50 other places. Tell your friends, because this is a subject that's going to continue to come up, and I think Barry's done a wonderful job of
Thank you,
presenting.
Barry.
Thank you.
You have been listening and watching David Levy, gerontologist and non-clinical family caregiving expert. Visit our website at caregiverreality.com and hear and see unscripted family caregiver support groups discussing all of the questions that you have wanted to ask but didn't know where to turn. Tune in again next time for more updates and special guests who bring their caregiving experience to you so that you can deal with your problems and hear how family caregiving is affecting fellow Americans just like you. The opinions expressed